And good afternoon. It's Charles Moscowitz doing my morning afternoon broadcast as I am wont to do every weekday at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to join the program, by the way, either on Zoom or if you'd like to not only be heard, but be seen, both in the recorded Zoom version and also live streamed on all the many platforms that are carrying the show. Or you could call. You could call us live. 339-244-3665 is the number. I'll be all right. 339-244-3665. As I launched this wonderful experiment of taking calls and doing essentially a radio talk show, just as I've always wanted to do. What we are looking at right now, I would argue, in this country and indeed spreading around the world, is a communist revolution. It is no different than communist revolutions that go back in modern times to the French Revolution, or the French, I should say, the French Reign of Terror, which co-opted the legitimate French Revolution, which was actually a counter-revolution. The French Revolution itself took place in 1789, the year that George Washington was inaugurated as President of the United States. And the people of France wanted an American-style government. They wanted a monarch who had limited powers. They wanted a constitution. They wanted to assert their natural sovereign rights as citizens. They had been inspired by the United States. They had looked to our example. Let's not forget that that Adams, Jefferson, and Ben Franklin spent the American Revolution years in Paris. That Jefferson had actually helped craft a constitution for a new French Republic, and that there was this whole idea of American-style assertion of rights as coming from man and given to government on a limited basis. This happened in 1789 when the monarch, Louis XVI, convened the French General Assembly for the first time, the Estates Generales, for the first time in many centuries, and agreed to a constitution, or the crafting of a constitution. Now, they say he didn't really want to do it. That doesn't matter. The fact is he did do it, and that was the key aspect of it. It was after that that the left was born. The communists were born. Now, they took over part of the Estates General. In fact, that's where the term left and right come from. The left side of the assembly was the communist side, and the right side was the more liberal, democratic side, the side that wanted the assertion of individual rights. And of course, the left side caused all kinds of trouble and agitation. There was a whole underground movement in Paris. A good source on this is James Billington's book, Fire in the Minds of Men. And Billington is no casual author. He was the Librarian of Congress. He was considered the nation's expert on Russia, consulted by many presidents, both Democrat and Republican. A respected scholar, one of the most respected of American scholars. And his book gets into the origins of the communist revolution, from the French to the Russian revolutions. Anyway, to bring things up to today, the French revolutionaries subverted the will of the French people, seized control in 1793 under Robespierre, and launched the Reign of Terror, where thousands of people were put in the guillotine, ultimately including Robespierre himself. And this was the revolution, the Reign of Terror. This was the world's first communist takeover. And it created a reaction. Catholics who had seen priests beheaded and driven out of the country, landowners, farmers, property owners, they reacted to this government and they got rid of it. And thus you had the Thermidorian reaction. And that led to, of course, the rise of Napoleon. And Napoleon, while certainly, embracing aspects of the subversion, nevertheless restored order not only to France, but he spread such order throughout all of Europe, with the development of Napoleonic codes of law that were actually liberal in the real sense. They emancipated the Jews, which is something that I support. But he also, he launched a movement toward individual rights, and based on the American ideal. Since then, there have been periodic communist revolutions. I think it was 1831, 1848, 1871, where you had this planned, coordinated agitation, usually in big cities throughout Europe mostly. And the result was an attempt to create this new utopian communist movement. In Russia, you had the development of the Zemlya Volya Society, which was founded by Michael Bakunin, an anarchist and a friend of Marx. And they started, they patented this idea of the propaganda of the deed. In other words, they would have an event, and usually an assassination, and then they would use that event to agitate for revolution. In the case of Russia, it was the assassination of the Tsar Alexander II in 1881, who was a very progressive Tsar in the real sense. He was bringing about a more limited government. He was instituting reform. He got rid of serfdom. He was developing the concept of private property, which of course was imperfect. I know I'm being simplistic, but he was moving the country in the right direction. And he was knocked off by this communist movement. That resulted in a reaction, which was a new Tsar, his son, who threw away his reforms and became a super autocrat. And thus there was a regression. Eventually, they finally succeeded with the Bolshevik Revolution. There was one in 1905 first, and then there was the big one in 1917 in the middle of World War I, where they were able to take over Russia and impose the most brutal, authoritarian, and collectivist system ever known to man. One that had killed 3 to 4 million people long before Hitler, years before Hitler even got started. At that time, Hitler was nothing more than a local young communist. And so you had the Bolshevik Revolution, which of course set off regressive communist revolutions around the world, certainly all over Europe, and established a communist presence in the United States, one that would be subdued by President Wilson, even though he was a socialist, and his Attorney General, A. Mitchell Palmer, in 1920, and would come back in the 1960s. Now, we could trace the history of this. It's the kind of thing that we need to identify because it'll never go away. But needless to say, in the 1960s, the communist movement, which is their classic technique, and which is in fact one of their planks in the Communist Manifesto, which goes over this, and which I've written about. You can check out my books. They would basically infiltrate and subvert what were otherwise legitimate, positive, genuinely progressive movements. And this has been the model ever since. I mean, they certainly subverted the civil rights movement of the 1960s, which was a movement toward a greater enfranchisement of American citizens. It was a Christian movement, actually. It was a movement that was supported primarily at that time by conservatives and by the Republican Party. And they came in, they subverted it on the street by burning down cities, in some cases destroying predominantly minority neighborhoods and hurting Black business. and creating poverty and suffering in major cities across the United States, including Detroit, Newark, and other various neighborhoods of Chicago and other cities. And these were neighborhoods that would never really recover. These were lives that would be lost, ambitions that would be thwarted for generation and continue to be because of these agitators who did it in the name of civil rights. They wanted to use Black people to perform their own revolution, which had nothing to do with civil rights. It had to do with collectivism and the demented idea of a utopia. And thus they continued on. I mean, it had the scissors effect. I talked a little bit about this yesterday, of people on the street, the agitators, and today they call them Antifa, and people in the boardrooms, people in power, the top corporations, governors, administration people, media, who would be aiding and abetting their movement whenever they could. And so you had the blade from above, the powerful, and the blade from below, the street agitators, working together in unison to cut up the American freedom. And I think that's exactly what we're dealing with right now. I'm hoping and praying that they're not successful. Now, of course, in the 1960s, with the destruction of, as I mentioned, predominantly minority neighborhoods at the hands of communist agitators who came in mostly from the outside, people like Saul Alinsky in Chicago, people who worked the streets but also worked the boardrooms and engaged in what we might call Fabian socialism, changing the laws, consolidating power, all in the ultimate name of world socialism, that they had their successes. They were able to create massive federal agencies and growth in government power, a sense that government is the source of rights, not the people under God. They used policies that destroyed families, particularly minority families. They had anti-business policies that hurt the development of business and the growth of business in the Black community in particular. And I think that Black people are natural entrepreneurs. They wanted to get into business, and they were getting into business and are getting into business. But this leftist agenda tried to thwart that, keep people poor, keep people dependent, get them dependent. They worked their way and wormed their way into education, as I mentioned yesterday, with their agenda to turn education from one where our children would be taught to think cognitively, think on their own, to becoming behaviorist guinea pigs. They would be used as cannon fodder for their, collectivist idea that they would no longer be sovereign citizens, children learning how to grow up and be independent and develop their own avocation, whether that be becoming a scientist or a mathematician, or whether becoming a beach bum or whatever it is they wanted to do. They could do it because they would have the basic skills to do it. Education, they transformed education to a collectivist, behaviorist, outcome-based so-called modality. And, that hurt American children, particularly minority children, because at the same time they were attacking the Black family, which had been intact, with their massive federalized welfare programs, and they were attacking the Black church with their atheism. The Black Christian church, I believe, was one of the greatest spiritual powers in this country. I think it transformed the white Christian church. And they undermined it with corrupt practices and with anti-religious rhetoric over time. And thus you had a permanent state of poverty and despair. You have young Black people were unemployed, particularly young men. You have families that don't have fathers because of the welfare program. And then you introduce drugs, and you have a recipe for a rise in crime and violence. And the only people left to deal with the symptoms of the very problems that they caused were the police. And they, they were the last line of defense. And sure, now they focus on destroying the police by pointing out, and rightfully, that there are some very bad police, like the cop who killed, really in cold blood, George Floyd in Minneapolis. This was a crime. He should be convicted of murder, in my opinion. I hope he is. And that there are problems in the police departments, as I mentioned yesterday, with regard to codes of omerta, that you don't turn in a bad fellow officer, and that the police patrolmen's associations they have a Masonic-like structure where you take an oath. It's not healthy, and it's not good, and it needs to be reformed. That's a given. But the fact of the matter is that the 90%, 99% of police who are good are doing a very difficult job. They go out and they risk their lives trying to keep their communities safe and trying to keep the Black community safe, where you have 99% of the citizens trying to live a productive life, trying to get to work, trying to have a family, just like everyone else. I mean, we all want the same things in life. We want to be left alone. We want to have safety. I mean, there's no difference in race on that. And there they are doing this job, and you got one rotten one. And rather than trying to solve a problem by maybe bringing in community overseers, by making sure that people are investigated properly, by putting bad cops, out of the system, which would have been done in Minneapolis had it not been for Amy Klobuchar, who had been district attorney at the time and who gave this cop a pass, even though he'd already murdered someone. You have a system that makes sure that the bad cops are weeded out. It's not that difficult. It can be done. And that gets rid of and dismantles these leftist programs and these leftist ideas that have been so damaging to the Black community. But now we're dealing with the symptom, which is that we have a bad cop in this case and in other cases. And we have a reaction, a legitimate reaction by the Black community to have it cleaned up that is being exploited by the same communists who exploited the civil rights movement in the 60s and that exploited other human rights movements going back, as I started, to the French Revolution. Genuine movements for human progress, movements that want to assert the right of the sovereign individual under God, living their own life on their own terms, determining their own destiny, establishing governments that protect and defend those rights so that they can function. We have the same communist conspiracy that is trying to undermine that. And that's exactly what's happening now. It is so obvious. It is so obvious to me. Anyway, you're welcome to call in. 339-244-3665 is the number. Please feel free to join the program if you're listening. 339-244-3665. Charles Moscowitz, Monday through Friday, 12 to 1 p.m. live here at all of the platforms that you may be watching. And there are many platforms that carry the program. And by the way, I have a guest coming on at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Dr. Mordechai Kagdar from Bar-Ilan University will be joining me. And at 4 o'clock, I've got Bill Tatro joining me, who is an economist and a talk show host. We're going to be talking about the economic effects of the pandemic and now the communist-inspired riots. So you're welcome to listen in. Those, I don't think on those I'm going to be taking calls. That's not an Open Lines program, but eventually I'm going to integrate my guests into this Open Lines platform as well. So that's where we are. We have to see it for what it is. Even the liberal governor of Minnesota and the liberal mayor of Minnesota has said that they had to arrest upwards of 60 people who'd been looting and burning the neighborhoods. And they found that every single one of them was out of state. Some of them were out of the country. Who are these people? Are we going to have a means to document this? Are we going to find out what their backgrounds are? Who they're connected to? Is George Soros behind this? I would venture to guess that he is. I saw an interesting tweet the other day that if they arrest George Soros, we can end this whole thing right away. In other words, he's an internationally connected leftist with a lot of money. He's one of the richest men in the world, thanks to defrauding various governments through currency manipulation, including Great Britain. Is he behind it? We know that he was behind a lot of other things that are like this. I think that this is an internationally based communist conspiracy. I've said that in the beginning, and I say it now. I think it has a lot to do with an agenda to try to stop and to defeat President Donald Trump. This is phase 4 or phase 5 of the coup d'etat, as Bill Still calls it, and he's right to do so. Bill Still is an excellent YouTube channel host. I recommend him. BillStill.com, or Bill Still, just put his name into YouTube. He does a great update. He broadcasts, I think, pretty much daily. Been around a long time. He's a reporter that goes back to the 60s, and he knows the inside in Washington. And he points out that this is just phase 4 or phase 5 of the coup d'etat against Trump. They couldn't get the across the plate that he was a Russian spy. They couldn't attack him for the perfect phone call with the new Ukrainian prime minister, which would have been fine. And by the way, I mean, they were willing to almost sacrifice Biden over that because he was talking about the corruption that Biden has been involved in over there, and we should care about. And now the pandemic, or at least the use of it. Now, I don't know if the pandemic was cooked up in a laboratory or not. It doesn't even matter. The fact is that we do know that the WHO was completely controlled by the Chinese, and that they dragged their feet in terms of revealing the growth of this virus for several weeks, thus resulting in spreading around the world. They're responsible for that. They got blood on their hands. And thank goodness Trump has dropped out of the WHO. What a great move. Very courageous. He doesn't answer to these deep state special interests. And now we have this. It's so predictable. They're going to fan the flames of race conflict. They're going to hit America in its weakest point, our greatest Achilles heel, and that is complex race relations. I mean, this is something that's real. And of course, we can't deny that. But they're going to exploit it in every way they can, with the idea of making sure that, first of all, minorities vote against Trump by trying to frame him, and fanning the flames for a lot of reasons. It galvanizes their supporters. Yeah, they even tried this during when Obama was running for re-election in 2012 with the Trayvon Martin thing. I mean, it was misconstrued and falsely portrayed as a race thing. Turns out that the guy that killed Trayvon Martin wasn't even white. Didn't matter. And that this was used as a subtle message, like a dog whistle, to remind Americans that anyone who does a goose step to the left, anyone that doesn't vote Democrat, isn't really black, as Biden himself said, but isn't really on the right side, isn't progressive. And at the same time, it galvanized people and it energized them. Oh, we're outraged over this. Look at this person. He's probably not one of us. He's a Republican. I think that maybe a difference here, hopefully, is that it's becoming more and more obvious that the perpetrators of this conspiracy are leftists, people that are involved in this loose thing called Antifa. They're going to try to blame the right. I don't think they're going to be successful at that. It doesn't make sense. Why would the right be out protesting anyways? I mean, are they upset? I mean, we're talking about like white supremacists. I mean, they should be happy that a black man was murdered, I guess. I mean, I don't know. Those people are like way out on the fringe. You know, they're a harmless group of nuts. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, they even the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is a left-wing group and which attacks mainline conservative groups as being racist, they've come out and admitted that the people involved in this are leftists. So, you know, I don't think they're going to get away with it. I think we need to understand who is behind this conspiracy. It is a communist conspiracy. It is a communist revolution. And if we can come to understand this with a clear eye, and we can thus begin to help, particularly Black people who are living in neighborhoods that are being trashed and burned and looted, help them survive, help them, you know, preserve their neighborhoods and keep these people out, then we can have a positive result. We can have the appropriate reaction, which is to get rid of these people and all of their enablers in the media, in government, at very high levels. That's all we can do. You know, I mean, I'm playing my small part doing this show and hopefully reaching enough people so that we can understand what's going on here. Um, and, uh, and just simply, as I say, identify the nature of the enemy, expose them, and counter them both in terms of public debate, but also literally by encouraging people who are being attacked by these criminals to defend themselves and to help them defend themselves, and also to insist that our government take the necessary steps to help them defend themselves against this premeditated communistic onslaught. At the same time, we need to continue to condemn police brutality. We can continue to help the administration move in the direction it's moved, which is to help people get out of prison who don't belong there. We've got hundreds of thousands of prisoners, predominantly Black, predominantly male, who shouldn't be in prison. They were put there for minor crimes. And this is as a result of the Clinton era crime laws. We have to have the courage to stand up and say that they need to get out, they need to get back to their families, they need to be helped. And I think that President Trump has already done that. That's something that has had bipartisan support. We need to continue emphasizing that while at the same time defeating this communist conspiracy that is against all of us, that is against America, and that is against our free-oriented way of life. Anyway, on that note, I don't think I have any callers or guests today, so I think I'm going to pretty much wrap it up, as they say. On that note, I have guests coming in later today on both. They'll be live streamed, but I'm not going to be inviting calls, and those will be recorded as well. Those being Mordechai Kadar, he's a professor at Bar-Ilan University in Tel Aviv. Let me talk about Israeli politics. I also want to ask him a little bit about the state of Judaism in Israel today. I had a good conversation the other day with a friend who said that Israelis are completely divided between the ultra religious and Jews who have no conception of Judaism. I want to ask him about that and about the sovereignty law or the state law that declares Judaism as the official religion of Israel, something I support, but something that's caused some consternation among non-Jewish minorities in Israel. I want to ask him about that. So stay tuned for that. That's going to be at 2 o'clock. And at 3 o'clock, I've got Bill Tatro. He's an economist. We're going to be talking about how the American economy has been affected by the pandemic and by the communist looting, what we can expect, what we should do, what can we do as individuals, and what the nation can do. I mean, there are two big problems there. One of which is that to respond to the pandemic, the country went into debt by trillions of dollars. And secondly, and even more importantly, the lockdown, which it's becoming more and more apparent was not wise in my opinion, but that's the policy, has seriously damaged smaller businesses particularly. people who are not, trying to get by on a shoestring oftentimes. Haven't hurt the big guys. So we'll be talking about that with Bill Tatro at 3 o'clock. Anyway, I want to thank you all for joining me this afternoon. This is Charles Moscowitz. My intention here is to do this program Monday through Friday from 12 noon to 1. You can join the program on Zoom if you'd like. I'm just figuring out the technology of how to make that available. I send out a tweet with links to the Zoom. So watch for that on my social network. And also, I'll be taking calls. And it's like an old-fashioned radio show. So check out the show. Please subscribe on my YouTube channel. Check out my books, available at Amazon Books. Just put my name in the server, Charles Moscowitz, and you will see about 15 books come up. And on that note, I want to again thank you for joining me. Have a great afternoon. Stay safe, everyone, and have a great day.